Hello and welcome to the EPRI Current. I'm your host, Samantha Gilman, and today we'll be talking about hydropower and the potential future climate risks to hydropower across the U.S. Today we're joined by two of my EPRI colleagues, Jacob Mardian, a climate scientist here at EPRI, and also Dr. Mark Christian, hydropower technical leader. Thank you both for joining me. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of climate risk and hydropower, I'd like to give you each an opportunity to introduce yourself to our listeners. So, Mark, why don't you go first?
Hey, first off, thank you very much for having us. My name is Mark Christian. We're really excited for the study and for the opportunity to present it on today's podcast. So my name is Mark Christian. I'm a technical leader in hydropower here at EPRI. But really what I do is really look at intersectionality as it relates to hydropower, right? Hydro touches so many things. It's water, it's energy, it's environment, it's flood control, it's so many interesting things. And that's really why I'm excited about the topic of today's study and our discussion really on today's podcast, because it really impacts such a diverse range of things. I've been here with EPRI for 4 years, and before that, I was a federal employee at the U.S. Department of Energy, and before that, I actually came up through the National Lab System. So I've been really fortunate to see a pretty broad and diverse set of research as it applies to the community. I think this study really continues on that thread. And thank you very much.
Great. And Jacob, what about you?
Yeah, hi, Samantha. Thanks for having me. Real pleasure to be here and talk about this topic today. My name is Jacob Mardian. Backgrounds in hydrology and climate science. Previously in grad school and in my time in the Canadian Federal Service, a lot of my work actually looked at weather and climate impacts on agriculture. So a little bit of a shift once I joined EPRI. Here at EPRI, I'm part of the climate risk and resilience team, leading our drought, hydrology, and wildfire research. Spend most of my time conducting risk assessments and developing forecasting tools for utilities. But really what's most interesting and what I enjoy most about the position is the opportunity to collaborate both across the Institute and externally on a range of topics, right? So climate impacts to hydropower, to nuclear generation, transmission and distribution. So really happy to be here today.
Great. So you two were the lead authors of a recent study that looked at climate risk to hydropower across the U.S. Mark, can you give us a brief overview of those climate risks and why this study was needed?
Absolutely. I think it helps to start off really by giving a little bit of context to the study, right? And so really the objective of this project was to look at large-scale climatological risks, right? So there's about 2,500 hydropower facilities within the United States. And frankly, they provide a wide range of services, right? So we're thinking about obviously generation, but we also have things like navigation, recreation, water supply, environmental support, flood control, and irrigation, right? And so the real objective behind this, given the diverse set of services, given the large scale of and number of these facilities, the objective of this project was really to couple available data to provide frankly, a fleet-wide analysis, right? And that's really valuable both to individual asset owners, right? So we're able to start to leverage these longer-term data sets along with site-specific information to contextualize climate change impacts or likely climate change impacts to the site. But then also to provide larger basin scale information, right? So hydropower, given the wide range of services it provides, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? So hydropower systems on a cascading river impact each other, they impact local communities. And really the objective behind this study was to provide information both to asset owners, but also to the community around them and between them, to really help start a longer term discussion and start assisting in or continuing to assist in providing information to help really improve risk-informed decision making moving forward. So I'm really excited about the topic and the results of the survey.
Jacob, can you talk us through the risks of extreme weather and the changing climate to hydropower and why it's important for us to understand that now?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, extreme weather challenges hydropower operations, even in the absence of climate change, right? Periodic droughts and floods have always created difficult trade-offs between generation, storage, mitigating floods, supplying water to municipalities and industrial companies, right? And so there are a lot of different objectives that Mark talked about, and sometimes competing with one another for limited resources. So the most extreme droughts, right, they can threaten grid reliability, especially in our areas that are really dependent on hydropower. The most extreme rainfall events can threaten dam safety, of course. But when you add this, climate change component, that shifts the probabilities of an extreme event occurring in ways that we don't always understand. And so that can, result in more intense or more frequent flooding that can prolong drought in some areas. A lot of our infrastructure, hydropower included, was designed for the 20th century climate. And there was this kind of implicit assumption that the future would look the same as the past. And so if these probabilities or intensities kind of shift over time, that affects our safety margins, as well as our economics of operating a plant. So I think the responsible path is to make sure that we can kind of quantify these climate risks. There's still a lot of work to be done in doing so currently and in the future. And stress test our infrastructure for plausible future conditions so that we can kind of plan accordingly, right? Whether that's through capital investments or changes to how we operate a reservoir.
So something that Mark mentioned is that there are about 1,500 hydropower plants in the U.S.
2,500, 2,400 dams, right? So we hit 1,500 of them.
I see. So that's a lot of power plants. It's more than I thought. I have been, getting more involved in the industry, and I keep finding out that there's one over here and one over here. I had no idea that there were so many. So add that to the list of many things that I have learned working here at EPRI. But with evaluating 1,500 for this study in particular, what was the purpose of such a large-scale study? And could you not just do a deeper analysis on some individual dams?
That's a really good assessment. And I think that's the real objective behind this was trying to capture broad, right? As part of the work, we actually worked with the New York Power Authority to do a really deep dive. But I think it's important to contextualize the level of effort necessary to do a deep dive assessment, right? So if we start thinking about mapping out, for 2,500 facilities, just the scale is challenging, right? And so I think one of the value propositions of this assessment is it starts to add another layer of prioritization, right? We can start thinking about hydropower, right? So we have these very high risk, sort of high impact facilities, massive structures with potential significant losses, both to human life, economic health, right? So those are high risk facilities all the way down to really small dams, mostly for agricultural purposes. And frankly, if something happens to them, there's not going to be significant adverse, or there's unlikely to be a significant adverse outcome, right? And so that's one contextualization of risk. But one of the value propositions of this is we can start to layer, these climatological risk assessments on top of those, right? So we can really start to contextualize climatological risk indicators to help inform future risks, right? So yes, it's really valuable to provide these sort of broader basin scale assessments for a policy perspective, for a planning perspective, for basin scale risk management perspective, but then also for these individual asset owners, right? There's a wide range of maturity within the space. There's a lot of ongoing work, but it takes a lot of effort, right? And I think this research really helps contextualize the results and really helps drive forward and can help concentrate resources more effectively to help highlight the facilities on top of the ones that are the most impactful. Of those, which ones are we most likely to see adverse effects? Of those, which ones can we start making decisions on now, right? So if we're starting to think about modernizing these facilities, we're starting to think about coordination between asset owners along a river, right? It really helps set the stage for these broader risk-informed investments and decisions moving forward, just with the understanding that, in an ideal world, we'd be able to hit all of them. But frankly, there's where everyone's managing limited resources. And this really is just one more layer that we can add to the conversation with communities and asset owners to help inform these discussions and priorities moving forward.
So I assume that 1,500 dams produces a lot of data. And if there's one thing everybody loves, it's data. But if there's something that I've learned, particularly working with the Climate Ready team, is that not data is created equally. There's good data. There's not as useful data. So Jacob, what types of data and models do you need for this kind of analysis?
Yeah, the work that we did here really stands on the shoulders of giants, right? There have been substantial efforts undergone by federal labs and agencies before us to create large public data sets that we were able to utilize. They did a lot of the groundwork in collecting that data and running hydrological models to summarize that data and to produce projections. So we're really grateful to those agencies. So I'll give you two data sets that we relied on. The first is the National Inventory of Dams, which was created by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And it really just catalogs dam attributes for all 93,000 dams in the United States and the 2,500 hydropower dams that we talked about. It includes things like how old is the dam, the hazard potential of the dam, the size of the reservoir and the spillways. So all of this information that we might use to assess its vulnerability to a changing climate. The other piece of the puzzle is we relied on Oak Ridge National Lab's streamflow data sets. These were congressionally mandated under the Secure Water Act 9505. So what they did was collected massive amounts of stream gauge records over the past 40 years or so, and kind of combined all of this into what we call a reanalysis data set. It's a comprehensive picture of what did stream flow look like across the United States in the past. Then they ran, future simulations to show how these stream flow regimes might change in the future. Right. So all of this was a major undertaking that required a lot of expertise, supercomputing resources. And so we built on that. So we took these indicators from about the dams themselves, about how the climate is changing, and combined them to see what the impact of these changes are on dams. So what is their ability to cope with these changes, to store, pass water, to generate electricity, and to support all of the different benefits that Mark alluded to earlier, like water supply and supporting river transportation, for example.
So then, given that, Jacob, what are some of the key takeaways from the analysis? Where are we seeing the risk?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. Of course, the results are going to vary, right, geographically across the different purposes that we've been discussing. I would say, as a general rule, we are projected to see more annual precipitation across much of the country. Right, so this can actually have benefits, and there's not always risks. In this case, there could be benefits for generating electricity. Right, if there's more fuel available, that's a positive. With the caveat that the timing of that precipitation and flows are really important, right? If they all happen in a short period of time, you might be drawing down your reservoir and spilling that water, versus if you have that steady throughout the year, that's kind of an ideal situation for operators. There are a few areas of the country in the south and in the southwest that are projected to kind of dry overall, so less annual precipitation. As we know, areas like Arizona and in the southwest already have a lot of water stress, and so when you add water stress there, that's going to make things much more challenging. And of course, right, plants with small storage, kind of relative to that amount of water, are going to be the most susceptible, and that's one of the things that we were trying to get at here. One other thing main takeaway that I'll point out is that we're expected to see larger storms and higher peak flows, almost ubiquitous, almost everywhere. Again, creates a lot of challenges for operators who need to kind of anticipate these storms, preemptively draw down. And so, facilities with sort of limited spillway capacity, limited reservoir storage capabilities are going to have much more tight margins during those peaks. And so in very rare cases, flooding can lead to dam failure, right? So it's really important that we understand where those risks are and mitigate them.
So, Mark, how can the utilities adapt to this increased frequency of extreme weather if they see these emerging risks? Can they make changes today, or does it require significant investment?
Well, that's a great question, right? And that's one of the spaces that I think the entire power sector and frankly infrastructure overall is really trying to get their arms around. I think the answer is an all of the above decision, right? And so there's a spectrum of opportunities based on both timing and cost, right? And so in the shorter term, for the frankly the lower investment level, we can start to think about integrating these potentially larger or inflows or more impactful drought conditions into our planning margins, right? So thinking about what decisions we need to make or how we would act in a future scenario so we can put in place those margins, so we can start taking in those actions into account, right? So with drought planning, how can we work with our stakeholders to maximize the value of the water we have available to us while minimizing the overall impact, right? And there's challenging trade-offs, right? But all of that starts with a conversation. There is things like, with flooding, being able to invest in longer term forecasting, being able to start to coordinate more and more, not only between, cascading hydropower plants, but with organizations too, right? And that already exists, but being able to contextualize that with sort of this, potentially larger flooding event or, significant inflow event really helps set the stage and helps start, enabling those preemptive decisions frameworks. So when things happen, you can ideally have better outcomes, right? And then there's a larger scale discussion here too, right? How do we start to integrate these longer term climatological projections into broader capital planning, right? And that's a challenging discussion to have, right? Because there is a spectrum of potential climatological futures, right? And there's a balance between the need to provide robust and secure infrastructure while maintaining affordable electricity. And I think, again, part of the goal of this study is really, again, to help add an additional layer of information, right? So we can start to think about integrating those, potential future outcomes into longer term capital planning, whether or not that's when you start to reinvest in a spillway modernization. Maybe you consider expanding the spillway capacity. If you're implementing a turbine, maybe we're worried about a more variable inflow. So you target a broader range of efficiency rather than just sort of a high peak efficiency point that you plan on operating over, especially given the longevity of a lot of these investments, right? So if we're thinking 40, 50, 60, 100 years, being able to integrate this information in a risk-informed way is really key, right? So I think the real goal behind this is to help start to have those conversations, to help inform those discussions, because there's a wide range of applications that this can have, and I think it all starts with understanding what your spectrum of potential futures really is likely to be.
And that's one of the things I find so interesting about hydropower is some of these generation sites are old. And the ones that maybe being put in place today are going to be there, like you said, 100 years.
Yeah.
And how do you predict out that far? And that's where EPRI comes in, right? So I find it fascinating, and I really appreciate you two coming in and talking about this recent study. And it's amazing how fast these podcasts go. So with that, we are at the end of our time, but I want to give each of you an opportunity to leave some final thoughts with our listeners. And also, if you are interested in reading this study or other products that have come out of the Climate READi project and so on, it'll be in the episode description below. And with that, Jacob, what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll leave the listeners with two final thoughts here. One, of course, hydropower is a critical asset for maintaining electricity reliability, especially as we transition to a clean energy system, right? So as the hydropower fleet is aging and the climate's changing, it's really important that we continue to evaluate these operational and safety risks and plan and adapt accordingly. And that kind of ties into my second point, which is I would emphasize that proactive planning and adaptation to climate change is consistently less expensive than being reactive, right? And we're at a really important crossroads right now. So I'd encourage companies to continue understanding and responding to these risks and capitalizing on any benefits. Right? So thanks again for having me, Samantha.
Of course. And Mark, the final word.
Sure. Frankly, where I'd leave this is a really valuable study, and it contextualizes risk both on an individual asset level as well as on a basin level. But this is just the start of a discussion, right? There's been as Jacob brought up, there's been a whole host of work in the space. And frankly, there needs to be more work. There needs to be more engagement. And this is the start of a broader conversation. And where I would leave it is if folks are interested in having more of a discussion, having more site-specific research, it is part of the EPRI model to really drive forward and continue to drive value in this space. And I think more engagement and broader research and more redundant studies, just to secondary checks, tertiary checks, given the importance of this work, is really vital, right? So this is a really valuable product moving forward, but this is just part of one step forward. And so I'm actually really looking forward to continue to work with the power sector, with the broader community, to really continue to drive value in the space. So thank you very much for the opportunity to have this discussion, Samantha. And I really looking forward to continuing to work in the area and to continue to drive climate resiliency. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. And with that, thank you to our listeners. Mark, Jacob, thank you. And we'll talk to you next time. If you liked today's show, we invite you to subscribe to our podcast and feel free to share with your colleagues and friends. For more information about EPRI, please visit our website at www.epri.com. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and X at EPRI News. Together, we're shaping the future of energy.